Let me introduce our keynote speaker, the former Vice President of the United States, Al Gore. We are honored that our former Vice President is here, and he'll be delivering the keynote address. Mr. Gore is a globally recognized Nobel Prize-winning leader for his work to advance climate change education and advocacy. He has dedicated his life to addressing the world's most existential and growing challenge that threatens the long-term viability of our planet. In fact, he credits our very own Roger Revelle, the founder of UC San Diego, with inspiring his deep commitment to climate issues. So we welcome his words of wisdom, and I can't wait to hear him. Mr. Vice President Al Gore.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Chancellor Pradeep Khosla, to the regents of the UC system who are here, professors, researchers, teaching assistants, all members of the faculty, members of the UCSD community who have supported this year's graduates, from librarians to custodial staff, kitchen staff, maintenance crews, security, so many more. To the alumni of UCSD, including my significant other, Liz Cadle, who is here with me today. To the family members and friends and parents especially, and by the way, tomorrow will be Father's Day. Congratulations to the dads who are here. And most importantly of all, congratulations to the graduates of the class of 2024. What a great accomplishment. It really is a privilege to be with you at this great university, which I have visited so often in the past, and maybe because of those prior visits, it may not come as a surprise totally that some of what I'm about to say will focus on the climate crisis. But on this day, I mainly want to talk directly to you, the graduating class of 2024, not just about the dimensions of this particular crisis, but about the reasons behind my fervent belief that our mobilization to protect and safeguard the ecological systems of the earth can be converted into a unique opportunity for a great transition in the moral posture, not just of our nation, but of humankind. In its largest dimension, the challenge before us is whether we, not only as a nation, but as a civilization, and even as a species, can summon the wisdom to use our brilliant technologies in ways that liberate humanity, or whether by default we shall see them become the means by which we are reduced to servitude. We have the scientific and technological means to make the right choices. The question is whether we have the moral clarity to recognize and then do what it takes. The answer to that question lies in the future, but decisions to be made in the immediate present will weigh heavily on the eventual outcome. Before turning to that future, I want to tell you a brief story about the past, specifically about the tremendous contributions this university has made to humanity's chances for success in resolving the climate crisis. I know this story well because throughout much of my career, I have been honored to work with and learn from many of the scientists and faculty at UCSD, including at SIO, of course, the Scripps Institution of Oceanography. And I would like to recognize some of those who have played a significant role in shaping my understanding of our planet, the threats it faces, and how we can successfully resolve them. 10 members of the UCSD community contributed significantly to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and were part of the group that received the 2007 Nobel Peace Prize. One of them is here today, Dr. Lynn Talley, and I'd like to ask Lynn to stand and be recognized. I also want to recognize the late, great Mario Molina, a chemistry professor originally from Mexico who was on the faculty here at UCSD and who was awarded the Nobel Prize in Chemistry alongside the late Paul Crutzen, himself a part-time professor at UCSD, and the late Sherwood Rowland over at UC Irvine, for their discovery of what was causing the first crisis of the global atmosphere, the sudden and shocking opening of an enormous and extremely dangerous continent-sized hole in the stratospheric ozone layer. They proved it was caused by a family of chemicals that were commonly used then in refrigerators, aerosol spray cans, among other uses, the so-called CFCs or chlorofluorocarbons. Their research served as the basis for the development of the Montreal Protocol in 1987. And by the way, it was UCSD's Ram Ramanathan who discovered that CFCs were also a potent greenhouse gas. During my time in the U.S. Senate, I was honored to work with these scientists and others here on efforts to reduce these harmful chemicals that were depleting the stratospheric ozone layer, and I probably also have them to thank for earning the nickname Ozone Man from President George H.W. Bush. I got the feeling he didn't intend it as a compliment, but I wore it as a badge of honor nonetheless. But my most significant connection to UCSD comes from my own experience as an undergraduate, albeit on the opposite coast, in the classroom of the legendary scientist Roger Revelle, a founder of UCSD, who completely changed the course of my life. Incidentally, I later learned that Revelle himself had a mentor in college who completely changed the trajectory of his life. When he entered college at 16, Revelle planned to study journalism, but as an undergraduate at Pomona College, he studied with Professor Alfred Woody Woodford, the founder and head of Pomona's geology department, who opened young Roger's mind, ignited his interest in science, and launched his remarkable life journey that had such a profound impact on multiple fields of science. It caused me to wonder how many chains of inspiration stretch back in time, linking inspiring teachers to students who half a century later then became a source of inspiration to a new generation of students. Some great teacher, I would bet, no doubt inspired Woody Woodford more than 100 years ago. And no doubt some of you who have been inspired by your teachers here will probably be an inspiration 50 years from now to young men and women who are the age then that you are right now. Roger Revelle is renowned, of course, for his contributions to climate science, but he also made important discoveries in fields as diverse as population dynamics and especially oceanography, where he made a seminal discovery about how heat flows under the Earth's oceans that became a cornerstone of our current understanding of plate tectonics. He became a founding father of modern climate science when in 1957, he recruited a young researcher, Charles David Keeling, to come here to join the Scripps Institute of Oceanography to take precise measurements for the first time of the concentration of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere at the Mauna Loa Observatory in Hawaii. Keeling did so skillfully, meticulously, creating what we now know as the Keeling curve, which is universally acknowledged as the bedrock foundation of current climate science. And of course, Dave's son, Ralph Keeling, continues to build upon that vital work to this day, and I want to take a moment to thank Ralph for his passion and dedication to continuing to compile this crucial record. Ralph, you and your dad before you are both heroes. Thank you very much. I first saw the results of the Keeling research when I was the age you are now, in Professor Revelle's class. At the time, only the first 8 years of the data were available, but the trend was already unmistakably clear, and it was startling. For 66 years now, this curve has measured atmospheric CO2 concentrations surging relentlessly from 315 parts per million in 1958 to 426 parts per million at its seasonal peak last month. By the time I saw that baby Keeling curve, Professor Revelle and Dave Keeling and Harmon Craig, also from Scripps, had already joined with 2 other scientists to issue the first formal written warning to a U.S. president, Lyndon Johnson, about the dangers of rising carbon dioxide in 1965. Please take note that 3 of the 5 scientists focused on atmospheric CO2 pollution in that historic document were from right here at UCSD and SIO. I don't know of any university community anywhere in the world that has made greater contributions to climate science and to the awareness necessary to solve the climate crisis than UCSD and SIO. Seven years after I took Ravel's class, I was elected to Congress from Tennessee, and I began asking right away what the U.S. was doing about the threat from these rising CO2 levels, and the answer was nothing, or more commonly, what threat? Soon I got permission from one of my committee chairs to organize the first ever hearing in the House of Representatives on the emerging crisis that was commonly referred to, when it was referred to at all, as global warming. And I invited Professor Ravel to come to D.C. to be the lead-off witness. I was pretty naive when I imagined that my colleagues sitting with me on the dais that day would have the same epiphany or aha moment after hearing a 20-minute statement that I had had after taking his full college course. Unfortunately, that was not at all what happened. However, my disappointment forced me to ask for the first time a question that I have been working to answer ever since that day. How can we create an aha realization for a critical mass of the world's people about the reckless damage we are doing to the Earth's surprisingly fragile ecological systems, so that governments can more effectively reason together about how we can stop the destruction and begin the long healing process? One of your regents in the UC system, Jose Hernandez, was describing to me earlier today his shock when he came around for the first sunrise as an astronaut and saw that thin blue line on the horizon as the rising sun illuminated it. You've seen the pictures. I wish I had seen it in person as you did, Jose. That thin blue line is blue because that's where the oxygen is, and it refracts the blue part of the spectrum. And it's so thin that if you could drive a car straight up in the air at interstate highway speeds, you'd get to the top of that blue line in 5 to 7 minutes. You could walk it in an hour, and all the global warming pollution would be below you. That's what we're using as an open sewer for the gaseous pollution that we're pumping into it every single day at the rate of 162 million tons every 24 hours. And it accumulates so much so that it now traps as much extra heat every day as would be released by 750,000 Hiroshima-class atomic bombs exploding on the Earth every day. Hard to wrap one's mind around it. But we have to realize what we're doing and then stop what we're doing. I have learned this. I've learned that we definitely can succeed, and I've come to strongly believe that we will. And by the way, just this past week, we got the wonderful news that 24 years after the discoveries by Mario Molina and his colleagues here that led to the Montreal Protocol, the levels of those harmful chemicals depleting the ozone layer are falling faster and sooner than expected. The international efforts that started here to solve the first crisis of the global atmosphere are working. The second crisis of the global atmosphere, the climate crisis, is of course a much bigger challenge still, in part because it is caused not by a relatively small family of niche chemicals, but by the burning of fossil fuels, which still provide 80% of the world's energy and which are produced by the wealthiest and most politically powerful industry in the history of the world. Earlier this year, a retiring international diplomat said that after he had served 6 years as the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Human Rights and the Environment, that the reason he believes we failed to take the action needed to adequately address the climate crisis is because, in his words, There's something wrong with our brains that we can't understand just how grave this situation is. But I disagree. Our brains are not broken. It's certainly true that we seem to be far more adept at responding to the kinds of threats our ancient ancestors confronted than we often seem to be at reasoning our way to a collective solution for much more serious and more complex modern threats. But we have shown that we can do so when the chips are down. And boy, are the chips down now. The real problem, in my view, is that the political and economic systems within which we operate day in and day out have been captured and distorted. And as a result, we simply do not enjoy the same ability to reason together clearly that we once did. Decades ago, the late University of Maryland political economist Mansur Olson published an extensive analysis of how elites in any society usually find ways over time to steadily accumulate a larger share of wealth and influence, and then use it to gain yet more wealth and power and block reforms to the incentives and rules that work to their advantage. It has happened in almost every country, in almost every century. The fossil fuel industry's takeover of policies related to climate in the international negotiations, in the halls of Congress, in state governments, and even in a growing number of local school boards is illustrative of this broader trend. But you see it with other issues as well. Just look at the disgusting way that the gun manufacturing industry has acquired complete control of virtually all government decisions related to gun control in the U.S., despite the fact that the overwhelming majority of Republicans and Democrats and independents all agree that we need stronger gun control. But those measures are blocked. When Roger Revelle and other scientists first sounded the alarm about the connection between burning fossil fuels and global warming, the fossil fuel industry took careful note. In fact, they hired and assigned their own staff scientists, good ones, to investigate the alarming findings in climate science and reach their own independent conclusions on behalf of the companies. And by the 1980s, several of the fossil fuel companies' own internal scientific teams and climate models confirmed completely what the scientists had found in government and in universities. And their own scientists concluded with impressively detailed analyses that unless the burning of carbon fuels were curtailed, the result would be potentially catastrophic for human civilization. At this point, the industry had a choice. They could confront the harm their business would do to the future of humanity and develop responsible transition plans, or they could launch a campaign of lies to try to obscure the very truth that they had themselves confirmed. Unfortunately, they chose the latter course. How could they do that, you might wonder? Well, it was deeply unethical for sure. But maybe it was partly explained by an insight articulated early in the last century by the muckraker Upton Sinclair when he said, "It's difficult to get a man to understand something if his income depends upon him not understanding it." Early on, they focused, the companies did, on denying that the crisis was real. And then they tried to claim there was a wide division among scientists about the basic facts of the climate crisis, a false claim that another UCSD professor, Naomi Oreskes, investigated thoroughly when she was here at this institution and definitively disproved. Her subsequent book with Eric Conway, Merchants of Doubt, documented the industry's decades-long effort to use massive fraud and falsehoods on an industrial scale, using tactics pioneered by the tobacco industry designed to undermine public support for action. By the way, it's worth noting that the tactics used by the fossil fuel industry are completely incompatible with the values of open and free academic discourse. I have empathy for how difficult it can be for researchers to find funding for their work and thus many feel forced to rely on grants from industry. But I would caution you to try to avoid getting tied up in the strings that are often attached to such funding. The fossil fuel industry's efforts to thwart the transition to clean energy could, over time, even threaten the integrity and reputation of institutions like SIO and UCSD that have provided the foundational research necessary to solve the climate crisis. For example, a peer-reviewed study done by researchers at Columbia found that universities, and UCSD was not included in this study, universities that accept fossil fuel funding for their research are far more likely to crank out research that is favorable toward fossil fuels, particularly methane gas. The researchers found that statements about gas from fossil fuel-funded academic centers are virtually indistinguishable from language used by industry groups like the American Gas Association. That is only one of the reasons that I highly respect and strongly support the determined efforts of the student groups at UCSD to address this issue. I highlight the fossil fuel industry's influence on academia because it is emblematic of the broader challenge we face in our society. In order to drive progress, whether on climate action, the pursuit of peace, or any of the challenges facing humanity today, we must address the influence of the special interests putting up barriers to progress. Our media ecosystem has also contributed to the manipulative and hyper-partisan nature of discourse in the United States today. Social media algorithms lure people down the so-called rabbit holes that have slippery sides. At the bottom of the rabbit hole is the echo chamber, and those trapped in an echo chamber become vulnerable to a new kind of AI, not artificial intelligence, but artificial insanity. That's where QAnon comes from. That's where climate denial comes from. That's where election denial comes from. In the immediate aftermath of World War II, the German philosopher Theodor Adorno warned about blurring the lines between fact and fiction. He wrote that the pathological foundation of Nazism was, in his words, the conversion of all questions of truth into questions of power. He warned that the determination of totalitarians to control what is regarded as truth, again in his words, attacked the very heart of the distinction between true and false. That sounds disturbingly familiar, doesn't it? Today, instead of looking first at the evidence and then deciding which policies match up with that evidence, too many hyper-partisans begin with their political identity first and then ask what so-called evidence their political tribe supports. The resulting dysfunctions and failures in self-government have further contributed to the rise of populist authoritarianism. So has digitization and globalization of the economy, with many people feeling left behind as lower-wage jobs have been centrifugally flung to lower-wage venues elsewhere in the world, and again with many governments absolutely failing to respond to the need for transition plans, job training, and income supports. As a result, in too many places around the world, democracy itself is seen by many to be failing. When the public is crying out in vain for change, then anger and apathy create a power vacuum into which special interests further expand their power. To create lasting change, we need to address this epistemology crisis, that is, the crisis disrupting our ability to discern truth, to search out the best available evidence for what is more likely than not to be the best available truth, and then to act upon that truth. It is time to rebuild the vitality of democracy by restoring a healthy information ecosystem, one that is centered on seeking the truth instead of more clicks, one that supports the restoration of the essential processes of self-government in the age of the internet, so we can start making good collective decisions again. We must take care in this moral moment facing humanity, where causes of life and death and war and peace weigh on us each and every day to drive progress with purpose and integrity. I want to emphasize to you, class of 24, that there is much to be hopeful about. When it comes to the climate crisis, we finally started to act. Every nation has pledged to reach net zero emissions of global warming pollution in the next quarter century. It's true that the crisis is still getting worse faster than we are yet deploying the solutions, and the danger is grave indeed, far graver than many recognize. But we are gaining powerful momentum. The United States has passed the largest and best climate legislation in history, and the cost for renewable energy and batteries, electric vehicles, and many of the other solutions continue to plummet rapidly. And by the way, there is a proven cure for climate despair, if any of you feel it. The cure is climate action, just as the cure for democracy despair is democracy action. Moreover, deep in one of the recent reports from the IPCC is some new climate science that is astonishingly hopeful. According to the latest scientific models, once we reach true net zero, temperatures will stop rising almost immediately with a lag time of as little as 3 to 5 years. And according to the way many scientists interpret this data, if we stay at true net zero, almost half of the human-caused CO2 will fall out of the atmosphere in as little as 25 to 30 years into the upper ocean and the trees and vegetation. And that's only looking at carbon dioxide emissions. If we also reduce methane emissions to near zero, the planet will actually begin to cool back down. It is not hopeless. We can do this. It is as if there is a switch we can flip to solve this crisis. But the switch is in our own determination to act. We have the solutions, we have the agency, and we as human beings have the capacity to rise above our limitations, throw off our constraints, political, economic, and social, and seize the opportunity for a better future that is right before us. Remember that in every one of humanity's previous great morally based movements, the abolition of slavery, securing women's right to vote, the ongoing civil rights movement, the LGBTQ movement, and others. In all of those movements, some of the advocates went through times when they felt deep despair, but in every case, when the underbrush of false argumentation was cleared away and the central choice was revealed as a choice between what is clearly right and what is clearly wrong, the outcome became foreordained at a very deep level because of who we are as human beings and how we were created. In closing, I want to share one final story. I was reflecting on America's race to the moon, Jose, earlier this week, after astronaut Bill Anders, who grew up here in San Diego, passed away at the age of 90. He was, of course, on Apollo 8, the first human spaceflight to exit Earth's orbit and go all the way to the moon and orbit the moon. Their mission was to identify an appropriate landing site for Apollo 11, planned for the following year. I remember vividly the moment that space race began. I listened to the speech made by President John F. Kennedy. I was 13 years old at the time when he challenged our country to land Americans on the moon within a decade and return them safely. 7 years later, after that speech, when Anders and his fellow astronauts came around the far side of the moon for the first time, he was astonished and amazed by the incredible beauty of the Earth rising over the horizon of the moon's surface. "Hey, get my camera," he said. The image Bill took that day, known as Earthrise, galvanized the modern environmental movement. The news of Bill's passing also brought to mind another famous image from that era. The picture of that team at NASA's Mission Control in Houston, raising their arms and cheering wildly in celebration of the very moment Neil Armstrong first set foot on the moon. You know, the average age of the systems engineers in Mission Control that day was 26, which meant that when they first heard President Kennedy's inspiring challenge, their average age was 18. Many of them changed their courses of study and prepared themselves for careers that would allow them help achieve the moon landing. So class of 2024, I am here not only to celebrate your graduation and congratulate you, I'm here to recruit you. We need your help in whatever walk of life you pursue. We need you to help solve the climate crisis and in the process, restore the proper functioning of our democracy. We have work to do. This is an all hands on deck moment. You're graduating just in time. We need you. And if you ever doubt for a single moment that we as human beings have the capacity to rise to this challenge and summon the necessary will to change, please always remember that the will to change is itself a renewable resource. Congratulations. Thank you. Let's renew it.
A big round of applause. I can't hear you. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Vice President.